and welcome to the latest installment of my Power Tools Made Easy series. My name is Katie, and today I'm going to talk about a circular saw. Circular saws are commonly called skill saws in the same way that facial tissues are called Kleenex. Skill is the highest quality manufacturer of corded circular saws, but when it comes to battery-powered circular saws, there's more of an even split in the playing field. My circular saw is a member of the Dewalt 20-volt lithium-ion collection. It has a 6.5-inch blade. So look at the parts of this saw. This is the battery, this is the motor. This here is the Allen wrench that you use to loosen the blade when you go to change it. And this lever controls your fence height, which sets your depth. Push up to loosen, and then you have the ability to lower or raise your fence according to the depth of material that you're trying to cut through.
Like with all saws, you want to set your depth so that just one tooth is showing beyond the thickness of the material. So you loosen your fence, raise your saw up until just one tooth is showing, and then tighten it back down. On the back inside of the saw blade housing, there's a little cheater guide for setting your depth. Currently, the arrow on the guide is pointing to the 2, which should mean that I have 2 inches of my blade showing, which also means then that I'm good to cut through material that is a little less than 2 inches deep. On the front of this saw is where you can adjust your bevel, which is the angle that you're cutting at. For almost all your cuts, you're just going to want to have it set at 0. But if you did want to change it, just loosen it, pull your fence sideways, and this part right here is what will indicate the angle that you're cutting at. But I'll just leave mine at 0 for today's video. This is the guard of the circular saw. For almost all applications of using a circular saw, as you're cutting through material, it will push your guard out of the way. So you don't need to worry about that. But if you ever need to get it out of the way for a quick second, you can pull up on this lever they attach to the top of it here and expose the bottom of your blade. In this circular saw, there's actually an arrow engraved into the guard to show me which way my blade spins when it's on. That's helpful for when you're changing the blade. If you forget to look which way your teeth are pointing when you take your old blade off, you can look at this arrow, see that you need the front of your teeth to be on this side because that's the way your blade is spinning, and then you'd be good to go. Also on the front of the saw is this little notch here. On this side of the notch, they have engraved a 45, and over here is a 0. That's telling you that if you have your saw set to 0 degrees, as you push it through the material, the line you have marked out to cut on should line up with the 0 side of this notch. And if you have your saw set at a 45-degree bevel, then your cut line will line up with the 45-degree side of the notch. On this top part of the saw is the handle, the 2-hand handle, the safety switch, and the trigger. In order to run this circular saw, you have to have the safety switch pushed down before the saw will allow you to pull the trigger to run the saw. The safety switch is on both sides so that if you are a lefty or a righty, you can still operate it. Now you know what it's called and what all the parts do. So how do you use a circular saw? Very carefully. What I would recommend is eye protection, ear protection, steel toes, shin guards, knee pads, hard hat, a life vest, gloves, and when possible, more eye protection. Or maybe just the first 2. Some of you guys have noticed I'm not always the best at remembering my eye protection, but this is one saw where anytime I skip it, I get something in my eye. Thankfully, it's never been anything more than annoying, but that should tell you and me that these guys are a great idea with this saw especially. These guys are more optional if you're using your circular saw out of doors and for a short amount of time, but anytime you're using a circular saw for an extended period of time, or no matter the time period, if you're in an enclosed area like this garage, cool kids wear ear protection. You want to mark out your entire cut line almost every time that you're going to use a circular saw. So I am going to mark out the line that I want to cut, and now we pause to talk more about saw safety. With any powered saw, you want the blade to be in motion before it comes in contact with the material. So you will push the safety and pull the trigger before the saw blade is touching the material. 2 reasons. First of all, if you start your saw while it's already touching your material, you will probably splinter the material. Depending on what you're cutting, that might or might not matter, but in any cases where aesthetics matter, that's not good. Reason 2,
If you start your saw while it's already touching your material, the saw itself will probably be pushed backwards at a high speed. And if you're not prepared for that, it can be dangerous. Which brings me to the main issue of circular saw safety, and that is kickback. In a healthy cut, you are pushing your saw in a completely straight line through your piece of material. What you want to avoid is the material or the saw ever going crooked in the middle of a cut. What happens in that case is the piece of material binds up in the saw, but because the saw is still running with a tremendous amount of force behind it, if it isn't able to continue cutting, the saw will then throw that piece of material. In a miter saw, your piece can go flying anywhere. In a table saw, it shoots straight backwards with enough force to bury itself in a wall. How a circular saw is different, the saw itself will be pushed backwards because it's mobile. And with circular saws especially, since it's only your own guidance that's keeping that saw going in a straight line, kickback is really likely, especially while you're learning. So here's what you do to try to eliminate it, but also how to use your saw in the meantime so that if it happens, you don't lose anything important. First, draw your straight line. Second, follow the straight line. I'll talk about correct body positioning in a minute, but just assuming that you've set yourself up so all of your parts are safe, you want to center all of your attention onto where your blade is going through your material and making as straight a cut as possible. As you're making a cut, if you ever get off of your line, do not try to bend the saw back in the direction you want it to go. Ever, 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 ever. It does not matter if it's just a tiny bit, you do not ever want to try to make this saw swerve, because it won't. That specifically is the #1 way that skill saws bind up and kick back towards you. So as you're cutting, if you ever get off of your line, just let go of the trigger, and when your blade has stopped, reset your saw at the last point where you were on your line and start again. Always apply firm pressure downwards when you're using your saw. You want to make sure that the entire surface of this fence is touching the material. You do need to exert some force to push your saw forward, but it should never be that much. If you feel like you're really having to stress to move that saw forward, it means that either you're trying to go too fast and you need to slow down and let the blade do the work for you, or it means that your saw blade is dull and you need to replace it, because accidents are way more likely anytime you're trying to force a saw to do anything. It's also super important to be aware of where all of your body parts are, as well as where they should be while you're using the saw. When I'm using my circular saw, I don't want any part of me to be behind it. And that is in any situation. And again, that's because when this kind of saw binds up, it's coming backwards. I know that you are not always going to set up your saw horses and have all of your material at perfect ergonomic height. So anytime you're just real quickly making a cut on the ground, on the tailgate, whatever, make sure that your feet are not behind the saw. If you're working on a long piece of material and you're trying to hold it in place, make sure that your hand is not behind the saw. Many a good finger and toe have learned that lesson the hard way. And it's not a hard concept, it's just something that when you have 500 other things on your brain, you might be more likely to forget, but don't. So, cut in a straight line, don't force it, get out the way. You want to be cutting on one side of your line or the other as opposed to right down the middle, because the blade itself takes almost 1/8 of an inch out of the material, just gone. If you had a 12-inch board, made one cut down the middle, your two pieces would total 11 7/8. So that's important because if I want to cut a 12-inch board and I make my line at 12 inches, I need to remember to cut on the far side of that line, because if I cut on the near side, I'll end up with a piece that's 11 7/8 instead. Make your line, line up your saw. Make sure your body is not behind the saw. Start the saw and push it through the material in as straight a line as possible, making sure to apply firm pressure downwards and slight pressure forward. If at any point you feel the saw begin to bind up, let go of the trigger. A good indicator is sound as far as if the machine is binding up. It will change and you'll know it. Notice I said let go of the trigger, not the handle. This hand is not in danger, and as long as you are to the side, you are not in danger. So hang on to the tool as you let go of the trigger. So I think that that is a good, healthy overview of how to use a circular saw. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive tips and tricks or all situations, anything. But if you have any questions like that, let me know in the comments down below, and I'd be happy to try to answer them or collect them for a future video. So guys, if you want to see more of me, hit the subscribe button. If you liked this video, hit that button too. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Bye!